Welcome to Behind the Warrior, a podcast presented by the EOD Warrior Foundation. This series will focus on resources, interviews, and topics impacting EOD warriors, their families, and the military community at large.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Warrior podcast. I'm your host, Maria Shabla, and today we are very excited to start our third interview in our Celebrating Women in EOD four-part series. And we will be speaking with Marine Corps EOD veteran and now licensed clinical psychologist, Michelle. Welcome to the podcast, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're so welcome. So, Michelle, I always like to start from the beginning. Can you tell us about yourself? Where did you grow up and what was your childhood like?
I grew up in upstate New York, close to Montreal, on a sheep farm. It was just me and my sister. And childhood was great. It was a typical kind of farm life, very small town. And there weren't any opportunities in that town, so I knew I had to get out.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was 18, I joined the Marine Corps. My best friend at the time was also going Marine Corps, so she kind of talked me into it. I knew it was going to be some kind of military, but I didn't know which kind.
Wow.
So I joined the Marines at 18, and I did my first 4 years in Japan, right on the base of Mount Fuji, where my billet was range control. And then after that, I joined EOD, because in the Marine Corps, you have to be 21 to be EOD.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't just go directly in. So you have to have a previous job. And then, yeah, that's how I got in. Yeah.
Well, so how did you learn about EOD and what sparked your interest in the career field?
Yeah. When I was in Japan, like I said, my billet was range control, but that wasn't my job. My job was field radio operator, but I had spent all 4 years doing range control. So when I knew, at that time I was a sergeant E5, and I knew when I went back to the States, I would have to go back to my original job. And I didn't know anything about my original job because I'd never done it.
Wow.
That was range control.
Wild.
Yeah. So I was looking around for other jobs, but as range control, you work closely with EOD because we have to, they go in and they clear the impact areas if something was shot that didn't detonate.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to go in and clear. And so range control and EOD would work closely. We would close the ranges so that they could get in. So we would escort them out sometimes. So that's how I found out about EOD. And I joined in the year 2000. So for those 4 years or so, I was working with EOD. But this was, the war in Iraq hadn't fully taken off yet.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was happening, but it was just something that was happening somewhere in the world. Like we weren't terribly involved. So my concept of EOD was limited to the range clearances.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I joined EOD, and while I was in EOD school was when the war really started taking off for EOD.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Before that, it may have been infantry oriented, but it very rapidly turned IED oriented.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us about your career in EOD and what happened after you got out of school?
Sure. After EOD school, I went to Camp Pendleton,
Mm-hmm.
and I actually learned that even before I got there, there was a master sergeant there who was already trying to find having his people search through regulations to find something that said that women can't be there, because they were combat oriented. So that was the kind of welcome I got to my
Wow.
first duty station.
That's incredible.
Yeah. But he couldn't find anything, and he was stuck with me. So I got there in January of 2005, and there was already, most of the unit was already deployed, so it was very empty when I got there.
Mm-hmm.
And then those of us who weren't were getting ready to deploy. So they put me on a team, and at the time, the team was a 6-man team that was divided into three. So um, I had my 3-man team, and there was another 3-man team, but we were all one kind
Mm-hmm.
of unit. And we went around the country training. We went to all the pre-deployment training, and we became good friends, actually. Uh, and yeah, we did all of that gearing up to go. And then we deployed, it was actually September 11th that we deployed in 2005. And when I got to, it was called Alticatum, we call it
Mm-hmm.
TQ. When I got there, it was under the command of an East Coast unit. And the East Coast unit, the person who was in charge was a man named Major Miller. And the first thing he did was pull me off of my team because he said mothers of America weren't ready to see a woman come home in a body bag. And he said Ramadi is too dangerous for a woman because my team was supposed to go to Ramadi.
Mm-hmm.
So he pulled me off my team and stuck me with the air wing who was staying at TQ, which turned out to not actually be any safer than Ramadi.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess he felt it was. And he he met me for maybe 10 seconds
Mm-hmm.
before he made this. So I know he was making a lot of he was projecting a lot onto me about his preconceived notions about women in EOD.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I didn't have any of the problems that he was expecting
Mm-hmm.
with-
Mm-hmm.
or anticipating because my team, we all got along. We were good friends. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
That is incredible. I can't even imagine how that must have felt.
Yeah. And the one of the worst parts was, well, one, I was sent to a new person, like the air wing that I was sent to. They had teams of two, but
Mm-hmm.
I had never met the person that they um put me with. So now I'm working with a person I haven't trained with, which fortunately we got along great too. But
Mm-hmm.
it was, it's kind of we hadn't practiced with 2-man teams. I didn't know this person. And then around the end of October, the team, well, they had replaced me on my original team with an EOD tech. His name was Sui. Um, and that whole team, like I said, was sent to Ramadi. At the end of October, the EOD team leader had to be replaced because my team leader got shot. He's fine now. He got shot by a sniper, and so they replaced him, but the rest of the team was working on a call and they poked on an IED and the whole team was killed. So I wonder if anyone ever explained to Suey's mother that he was only killed because mothers of America weren't ready to come to see a woman come home in a body bag.
Oh my goodness, Michelle.
Yeah.
I
So
am
that
so
was,
sorry.
oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
So that was October. And then in November, we were out on a call, me and my partner, and my partner got killed. It was just him and I, and well, there was a whole security team leader and somebody who was training up to be an EOD tech at the time. But as far as EOD techs, it was just him and I, and then he got killed. And people kept getting killed after that throughout the rest of the combat deployment. But I was checked out. I was emotionally numb between losing my first team and then losing my partner. And 4 days after losing my partner, we also lost our security team leader. So I came back kind of disassociated.
wow.
Yeah.
That is incredible. So when you got back, how did you process all of that?
I tried all of the bad ways first,
Mm-hmm.
um, so that I don't recommend. Um, At first, like it was way too much to process for somebody my age. I mean, I was 23 back then,
Mm-hmm.
maybe 24. Um, and so it was all of the symptoms of PTSD combined with grief and traumatic grief and having grief attacks. And so I would be driving down the road and you hear a song that reminds you or something like that, and I'd just have to pull over. And the thing is, even when you're back in the States, you don't stop losing people because you still have friends over there. So every now and then you get a phone call and it always starts with, "Hey, did you know so and so? Or do you know so and so?"
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like the worst news. It's like, "Oh, well, they're dead, or this person's dead." And so, you know, you weren't even safe from loss being back in the US. So for a little while, I was drinking, and I found that when I got to the point where I could drink, or where I wanted to drink in the morning, or where I could drink like four by myself, which I'm a very small person, so four would be a lot for me
Mm-hmm.
in one sitting. And then I was like, okay, this is a problem, so I just quit entirely. And then I went to therapy, and I never hid the fact that I was going to therapy. I actually went the work during work hours.
Mm-hmm.
I told them like, look, I got something I got to take care of, and I went looking for therapy. And at the time, so this was 2005, they didn't have many resources on base. I was on Camp Pendleton, and I went to, I think it was like Family Services or something, and they didn't know, so they sent me to the next place, to the next place, and so somebody even like walked me around base trying to find it until we got to a place where they do therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a type of therapy called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, so EMDR, which is
Mm-hmm.
something I now do as a psychologist. But back then, there were about there were two or three therapists at this place on Camp Pendleton, and this is for all of Camp Pendleton. So if you weren't suicidal, they kind of didn't have time for you. So they
Mm-hmm.
gave me 3 sessions and then called me cured, and I was anything but cured.
Oh
So
my
I was
gosh.
better though after 3 sessions. I wasn't completely better. I was better than where I had come in from.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then um, I also discovered at the time I discovered hypnosis, and that was the only thing that helped me sleep, which is another thing I do still as a psychologist. It's very similar to mindfulness and meditation,
Mm-hmm.
but it has like kind of like a countdown that brings you into relaxation because I was having a lot of trouble sleeping. So that was one of the only things that helped me get to sleep was listening to pre-recorded hypnosis tapes. So I guess CDs back then. And
Wow, hypnosis, that's so interesting.
yeah,
And it helped.
it helped a lot. I still do it, like I said, as a psychologist. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Um, wow, that is so much to process. I think you had mentioned when we talked earlier that as you were going to therapy and as you were open to the fact, not hiding it from anybody, that there were some men that would start asking you about what you were doing.
Yeah, actually, because I never hid it,
Mm-hmm.
and I never hid it because, well, one, I didn't really care what they thought, and because I had already kind of, by losing so many people, it's kind of like that red badge of courage thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, they couldn't tell me I didn't have a right to mental illness almost.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
um, but because I never hid it, several men did come up to me and ask, like, how did you go about it? What is therapy like? What do you talk about?
Mm-hmm.
And they were then able and willing to go get therapy because I was honest about it. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. Yeah, trailblazing the way.
Yeah.
And it's just incredible to listen to your story and see how far we've come. Because you
Yeah.
had been through so much and 3 sessions is like barely scratching the surface. Um,
Exactly.
So, I think it just shows we've come a long way. We still have plenty of way to go, but
Mhm.
that's encouraging to hear your story. Um, so, so how much longer did you end up staying in the military?
I was active for 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I did two enlistments as EOD and I did two deployments to Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and um, when after my second deployment, they asked me to take a team. They gave me orders to Okinawa
Mm-hmm.
again, and then they asked me to come 6 months early and take a team to Afghanistan. And this was after two deployments, and I had also just met my husband. I was like, I really like this guy. I know leaving is going to end that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But also, it was like, this is never going to end. They're going to keep using you up, basically. So
Mm-hmm.
I turned down the orders and got out
Mm-hmm.
because also um, I had started questioning why I was there in the military, what were all the losses for, what were we gaining,
Mm-hmm.
um, and because there was a brotherhood mentality, which was in many ways healing. It was also keeping me there because there's this pressure to um, to deploy to alleviate the stress and to pull your weight and that kind of thing, which is great. But it also meant that I was only like I kept re-enlisting because they need my help, or to be just to contribute to the brotherhood. And then
Mm-hmm.
I asked myself, if I am doing this, how many people are also doing the same thing for me?
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, it was like I came to the conclusion that the only way to stop was to take myself out of the equation. So I got out entirely, just left.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so what was that transition like?
Oh, that was really hard, actually. Harder than I thought it would be,
Mm-hmm.
because for 12 years, all of my adult life, I had been in the military.
Yeah.
And um, not just in the military, but also having seen combat. And then when I got out, it was it was a completely different culture, and I wasn't expecting that because I'm American,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't expecting a culture shock just by moving to a different town.
From
But
goat
then,
farm to military to
yeah,
EOD to combat, and now you're like, what is going on?
exactly.
Yeah.
And I went into grad school after I got out. Um, and I remember, like, just as an example, I remember the first time a doctor gave me a prescription as a civilian, and I was like, "What is this piece of paper? What am I supposed to do with this? Like, how do civilians work?" And, and I was,
What is a civilian?
yeah, and they you don't look at me and think combat veteran.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if I ask like, "How does this work?" From a civilian doctor, they're going to be like, "What are you?" How do you not know this? Because you're a
Mm-hmm.
middle-aged woman. Have you never gotten a prescription before? Especially if they don't know my history.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of just learning the ways of being a civilian. And I remember, like, another example was I went to grad school and I went to their orientation. And at their orientation, they said, "This is a professional school, dress professionally." And then the very next person said something to the effect of, "Yeah, don't come in your pajamas." And to me, that's like an extremely wide range between pajamas and dress professionally. Because if you tell a Marine to dress professionally, they're going to come in a business suit.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And then don't come in your pajamas. And I'm like, I spent 2 weeks just stressing about what do people wear to a grad school. I didn't know anyone, so I couldn't ask.
Was it really like, was it professional, like business casual or what?
No. not in the
Jeans,
slightest.
right?
Yeah.
Jeans and
Yeah,
t-shirts.
jeans and t-shirts. It was really just don't show up in your pajamas. Like,
Yeah. Oh my gosh, how funny. So where
yeah.
did you end up deciding to kind of start your life over and go to
In
grad
Los
school
Angeles.
in
Yeah.
Los Angeles? Okay.
Yeah. My husband is LAPD, so
Oh wow.
he's um here in Los Angeles. And so I
Mm-hmm.
went to the Los Angeles campus of the Chicago School of Professional Psychology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nice. So you went into grad school, and at that point, did you know that you were interested in pursuing a degree in psychology?
I did, I figured it out while I was in actually. Um, if you ever ask anyone in the mental health field why they got into it, you're going to get one of two answers, which is
Mm-hmm.
going to be to save myself or save the world. And
Wow.
it's a variation of that, but it's
Mm-hmm.
always the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of it was because I knew I needed more therapy. And I had, after those 3 sessions, when I was stationed at Miramar, um, after my second deployment, I went to go get therapy again, but that psychologist was actually an example of almost everything not to do as a psychologist. So
Oh
that
no.
didn't work. Yeah. But I still knew I needed help. So, one, I started studying psychology, but the other reason, so that was the help myself thing, but the other reason of saving the world kind of thing was because as a woman, the men would seek me out even before I was interested in psychology, just to have somebody to talk to about mental illness or whatever they were going through. It didn't even have to be mental illness. It could just be social problems or whatever's on their mind. But they sought me out um, in the way that you would seek out a mentor or a therapist or something like, someone in the mental health field.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Probably because, especially in Iraq, there's very few women for one,
Mm-hmm.
and because they knew I had gone to therapy, and because they're always, I shouldn't say always, but often looking for like the mother figure to talk to, or the sister or somebody less judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so when they put me in that role, I found that I was good at it. So I
Wow. It
decided to make
just
a career. Yeah.
came natural.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, because I'm thinking you got out of school and there was this war raging that you were deployed to instantly as a young EOD tech,
Hmm.
in a male dominated, obviously, career field, more so back then, I'm sure. So,
Hmm.
what was your experience like being the only woman in your squadron, platoon? I don't know what they call it
Yeah.
in the Marine
Unit.
Corps
Yeah.
unit. Okay.
Yeah.
What was that experience like?
Um, it was, well, I knew every time I went to a new unit, I knew I would have to prove myself.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I find that if you are just genuinely authentic, people will like you. And if they don't, that's kind of more of a them problem.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I I saw that some other people, other women, tried tactics of trying to fit in ways that I wouldn't consider appropriate. And I didn't want to do that. I was just like, they're going to like me or they're not. So I'm just going
Mm-hmm.
to be me.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're good at your job and if you're authentic, they're going to like you regardless. And if they don't, that probably has nothing to do with you and everything to do with them.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that perspective. And I think you had mentioned earlier too that I that was really interesting that a lot of times people projected their own ideas on you as a
Mhm.
woman,
Yeah.
without getting a chance to get to know you and see you perform your job.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially if they had already come in with preconceived notions, then I knew it was a projection because if they didn't meet me, they couldn't judge me.
Mm-hmm.
So Major Miller and his theories about women was a perfect example.
Yeah.
He maybe met me for 10 seconds. So he
Wow.
didn't know if I knew my job. He didn't know if I was a decent person. I could have been an alien for all he knew.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And I think, over the years, I'm sure that it's gotten much better and we've got more and more women in the career field. But yeah, I'm just still shocked at that comment that he made without even knowing you.
Right.
Blows me away. So now, Michelle, at the foundation, we are really trying to help techs transition out of the military. And, we know that that can be a time of struggle with mental
Hmm.
health and just adjusting to civilian life. So, can you tell us about some struggles you may have had and then how you dealt with them?
Yeah. Another struggle that I had and that I see other people have is it's a loss of your identity for one, because you are no longer in, in the military. But it was, especially if you went into a college environment like I did, it was also the loss of being important.
Hmm.
Because as an EOD tech, even when I was 24, my some of my reports were used for evidence in congressional committees or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, and then I would go to grad school and I'm being questioned about being in the hall during class. And plus I was older than everybody else. Most of the other people were, in the early 20s, and I think I
Hmm.
was in like my early 30s by then.
Hmm.
So there's a loss of your identity, and there's also the kind of the blow to the ego where you're no longer important.
Hmm.
And you have to start creating a new identity and find a new way to be important.
Wow. So, how did you do that?
Um, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was told by my classmates that I did that by assuming a leadership role in in the class. But even then, I don't think I did it intentionally. I think I did it because I was the oldest and because by then, one of the benefits of do accomplishing so much so young is that there's kind of not a lot people can do or say to you after that that's going to be much of a punishment. So if there was something that needed to be said and other people in the school or in the class were not able to say it, I would be the one to say it because
Wow.
I'm like, what are they going to do? Send me to Iraq? Like the worst they can do is say, stop saying things. Like, so
Wow. What a perspective. That is so wild. I love it.
thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously from EOD to psychology, that is a pretty drastic
Yeah.
kind of a drastic change. So after you graduated, can you tell us about your practice and how that all kind of played out?
Yeah. Um, for a while, I was working at a free clinic. And then during the pandemic was when I left the free clinic and started my own private practice.
Oh wow.
Um, and now I still have my private practice, but the practice is basically as a contractor for a company called Rula. And that just allows me to take insurance because
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out the insurance game is one like horrible, but I feel like especially horrible since I've never used civilian insurance, so I don't even know it from the user side. So people will throw out words like deductible to me, and I use the VA, so I never had to pay a deductible.
Oh
So
my
I
gosh.
yeah. So that's another way that it affects you is I still don't really have a major concept of civilian healthcare. I'm getting it because I've worked in it when I was at the free clinic, but even
Uh-huh.
there I didn't do my own billing.
Yeah.
Um, So in my private practice, I'm still a trauma therapist.
Mm-hmm.
My degree technically is clinical psychologist, but my major was neuropsychology.
Mm.
So um, in grad school, I was doing things like neuropsych testing, which would be for traumatic brain injuries or strokes, and developing cognitive rehabilitation plans.
Mm-hmm.
But I think my passion was always trauma. And so I'm still a trauma therapist, but I've found that even if I was trying to specifically aim for veterans, once you find your path into trauma therapy, that sort of opens it up to all trauma. So right now I have everything from child abuse to torture cases to combat trauma to neglect to
Wow.
domestic violence victims. So it's all of the trauma kind of clumped into one.
Mm-hmm.
And then also just things like general depression or low self-esteem or that kind of stuff.
How do you keep yourself grounded and sane when you're talking to all these people that are processing trauma?
Um, I I don't think this is unique to me, but I think at some point as people become a therapist or psychologist, they have to learn to not take on the world's problems,
Mm-hmm.
because you will get overwhelmed quickly. And in grad school, I did. And at some point, you have to acknowledge that you can be a witness to their pain and you can help them in their pain, but it is not your pain, it is theirs.
Wow.
Because if you make it yours, you will get crushed by the weight of the world.
Wow, that is so interesting.
Thanks.
So
Yeah.
it's really just a perspective. It's just how you're looking at things.
Right. And it's not
Yeah.
to say that I'm not empathetic and I'm like not sympathetic, but
Hmm.
I can't keep it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is such a gift. I really
Yeah.
think it is. Yeah.
Thank you.
Um, so there's something that you had mentioned when we were talking earlier, and it was combat itch, which I found so fascinating. Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, that was my doctoral dissertation.
Uh-huh.
So I did my doctoral dissertation on the desire to return to combat because um it felt like an addiction. It feels still to this day like an addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is in the same way that somebody could be addicted to um like a very chaotic environment. I also see the same thing sort of with domestic violence victims and how they
Mm-hmm.
keep going back. So it is sort of an addiction. But so when I did my doctoral dissertation, I've interviewed other people, and the truth is, I've never talked to anybody who saw combat who did not at some point miss it. And it feels like it's you're missing it in a sick way because you know it's not good for you. You lost so many people.
Mm-hmm.
When I got back from my first deployment, within a couple weeks, I volunteered to go on another deployment. And fortunately, my boss at the time knew that I was way too mentally unstable to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So he wouldn't let me, and he didn't submit my name. But it feels like it does feel like an addiction. And actually, just last week, another psychologist, somebody who works at the VA on the East Coast, um, found my phone number and asked for a copy of my dissertation. And because he was also looking into the same thing about why do people want to go back. And so I sent him my dissertation and we were talking back and forth. And he says that he struggles with the idea of calling it an addiction because he doesn't want to pathologize it. But I would actually say by not calling it that, you may be invalidating the experience because um, because it really feels like you know it is horrible for you, but it's like the one thing you want more than anything, and you can never have it again. And you know you can never have it again. And if
Wow.
that's not an addiction, I don't know what is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it wasn't even just um, combat veterans. I didn't put this in my dissertation, but
Mm-hmm.
I talked to several combat reporters, and they said the same thing. Um, For example, one of them only stopped reporting because their child broke out in hives when they were about to go back. And so it's not just the addict or the veteran who's suffering, it's also the family of that person. And
Mm-hmm.
so again, that sort of speaks to the idea that that it's an addiction because you know it's bad for you, you know it's bad for the people who love you, but you still want it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they stopped reporting because of that incident. And there were other combat reporters that I talked to who had very similar experiences, and even combat veterans. You see this when people get out and they try to find something to scratch that itch,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's going into the paramilitary or also joining private military companies and essentially being mercenaries, or finding a way to find combat. So the people who will find a war, whether it is going to Africa to protect the wildlife, um, or going to Ukraine. Um, and I'm not saying that those are not worthy fights. Like those are
Mm-hmm.
like I'm all for protecting wildlife and, defending civilians and that kind of thing. But
Mm-hmm.
if it's not good for you and it's not good for your family, but you're doing it anyway, that's kind of a perfect example of an addiction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow, that is so interesting.
Thanks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So, Michelle, I have to ask this. What advice would you give women coming into the EOD field now?
My advice is probably going to be definitely different than the advice I got, and probably different than what you'll hear from other people. Because the advice that I got, and usually the advice you hear, is some version of be as strong as the men, don't let them see you're weak, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And physical strength, it is important. It's important for the job. It's mostly just important for your own health. But I wouldn't say it's the end all and be all.
Mm-hmm.
My advice would actually be to embrace your differences. Um, Especially as a woman, you will never be a man, so it's don't try.
Mm-hmm.
Try to be yourself as authentically as you can, so that the people who are going to like you are going to like you for the right reasons. And because, just to give you an example, I'm 5'3", 125 pounds, and I always have been. I'm never going to be able to be a 200-pound man who can lift things. But when I was in Iraq, I was sought out several times for being the only one who could fit in the small hole that went to a cache, or the only one light enough to climb the rickety ladder, or the only one light enough for them to lift. So I would say embrace your differences because the more diverse the team, actually, the stronger the team.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, that would be my advice. Yeah.
That is great advice. I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, Michelle, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us and share your experiences, um, and really the trauma that you experienced and how you overcame that and now you're helping others. That's truly just an incredible story. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so we're going to end the interview with our tradition of asking you a couple of your favorite things.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. What is your favorite hobby?
I would say I have two of running and I write romance novels.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's incredible. Can you share any with us? Do you have a pen
Um,
name or?
yeah, I have a pen name. This one is my series starter. It's
Oh my
Joel
gosh,
Gopher is my pen name.
that
Yeah.
is awesome. I did
So that
not
one,
see that coming.
thanks. Yeah.
How many
So
books
that's
have
an
you
8 book
published?
series.
Wow.
I think I have 11 out now and two on the way.
Wow, that is awesome.
Thank you.
You know what? You just reminded me too. I wanted to ask you, and I'm sorry, I'm going astray here a little bit. But you had this incredible story about running and how you went from hating running to loving running. So can you share that
Yeah,
with us?
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that story.
For my first 4 years in the military, before I was EOD, I hated running and I thought I was very bad at it. I would fall out of all of the runs that we did as a unit, and the military, especially the Marine Corps, is hyper focused on physical ability.
Hmm.
So if you fall out of a run, they tried to punish me by putting me on duty on the weekends because that's obviously going to make me run better. Um, they would scream at you and tell you how worthless you are because you can't run and how you're just a horrible Marine and all of that. And then when I went to EOD school, it was a much different mentality. So there's the Marine unit for one was smaller, so there was only a few Marines because I think at the time there were maybe 50 altogether at the EOD school. And then even when you're running with your unit, once I got to my unit with my 6-man team, you would go and work out together. And their uh, tactic was completely different because it was so much more of a brotherhood. So when I was running, if I fell out of a run when I was at EOD school, the people in charge was actually Wayne Krakowski would run with me at the back, and he would say things like, "Good job, keep going. Like, you're doing great. Like, look, you almost caught up." And so it was positive reinforcement, and
Wow.
that made me want to do better. And the same with my team. When I was with my 6-man team and we would work out,
Hmm.
they would say things like, "Oh, look how far you've come," because we'd be lifting weights, and they would spot me, and I would go from whatever little weight I started with to being able to lift weights, and they would say, "You're doing good, good job, keep going," that kind
I
of
love
positive
that.
reinforcement. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And now
By
you're
the
still
time,
running.
yeah, I still running, and by the time I got out of EOD, I was running marathons, and I had like
Wow.
a almost perfect PFT at one point. So,
That is so awesome, Michelle.
yeah, it
I
was
love that.
just the difference between shame versus positive reinforcement. And that was
Yeah.
one of the wonderful things about the Brotherhood of EOD.
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody keeps mentioning that in this series, and I love that, the sense of brotherhood.
Yeah.
Um, so well, the next question was your favorite way to stay fit, but I think we already answered that.
It's that, and the other thing that I do is I do aerial silks, which is like the Cirque du Soleil thing. So, um, I do that on the weekends. So,
What is that?
let me see, I'll show you. Have you ever seen the Cirque du Soleil shows where they have the ribbons? Um,
I
I mean, I can. Let's see.
I've never been to a Cirque du Soleil show,
Oh,
but
okay. So, let me see. Can you see that? There we go. Oh, wait.
yes, yes.
Oh, sorry.
Is that you?
That's me. Yeah.
God. Wow,
And
that is
that's
wild.
actually a lot of exercise.
It looks like it. It looks like
Yeah.
it. That's incredible.
Thank you. Yeah. So those are my favorite ways to stay fit.
You are full of surprises.
Thank you.
Okay, and I always love to ask about food. What is your favorite type of food and or recipe?
Let's see. I'd say my favorite type of food is probably still Asian food,
Hmm.
although I'm really into Italian food too. Um, my favorite recipe is like a Korean inspired, um, it's ground turkey, but it's flavored in a bulgogi style. So it's ground turkey over rice, basically.
Ooh, that sounds
But
so good.
yeah. Um,
Awesome.
I,
Okay, and I have to ask the last question. Since you are a writer, who is your favorite writer?
oh, so many. I think my all-time will always be Neil Gaiman.
Neil Gaiman.
Yeah,
What
he's my
what ty-
all-time favorite.
what type of books does he write?
It's fantasy and or sci-fi fantasy. He wrote Coraline. He wrote Angels and Demons. He wrote, was it? Yeah, Angels. Oh, I have it behind me. Good Omens. That was not Angels and Demons. He wrote Good Omens. He, um, yeah, there's a lot of them have been made into movies. I think one of them was called Stardust. Yeah, I have the books here, so I can just look. American Gods was made into a TV series. Um, but yeah, he's always been my favorite.
Wow, we'll have to check him out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again so much for your time and for your inspiration. And we wish you the very best with your practice and your life out in California.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to our Behind the Warrior podcast, brought to you by the EOD Warrior Foundation. The EOD Warrior Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization serving the EOD community by providing financial assistance, scholarships, and providing hope and wellness resources for the active duty, reserve, National Guard, retired, and veteran EOD communities and their families. We also honor our fallen and wounded EOD technicians by maintaining the EOD Memorial and Remembrance Garden. We do all this through the generosity of individual and corporate donors and sponsors. If you would like to assist the foundation or support our Behind the Warrior podcast, click the link on our webpage at eodwarriorfoundation.org or contact us at info@eodwarriorfoundation.org. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to tell a friend. The various opinions, beliefs, and viewpoints expressed by guests, contributors, and participants of the Behind the Warrior podcast are their own and are intended for informational purposes only. They do not necessarily reflect the opinions, beliefs, viewpoints, or policies of the EOD Warrior Foundation or its employees and volunteers.